The day I showed my aunt the hidden bank statements, she went so pale I thought she was going to faint right there in the solicitor's office. 3 accounts, 4 years of transfers. Just over £200,000 of my mother's money, gone, and my aunt's name on every single one. She'd been stealing from her own dying sister, and she did it with a smile on her face every Sunday at dinner. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't make sense without it. My mom was the kind of woman who held everything together with her bare hands. She raised my brother Daniel and me on her own after our dad left, worked double shifts at a hotel for years, and somehow still managed to make every birthday feel like a celebration. She was generous to a fault. Everyone in the family knew it, and apparently at least one person decided to exploit it. Her sister, my Aunt Carolyn, had always been around. She was charming in that slippery way some people are. Always laughing, always with a compliment ready, always the first to offer help when there were other people watching. Mum adored her. They'd grown up close, and I think Mum always felt a quiet guilt that her own life had turned out more stable than Carolyn's, who'd been through 2 failed marriages and a string of bad financial decisions. So, when Mum was diagnosed with early-onset dementia at 63, it was Carolyn who stepped forward and said, "Let me handle things. You don't need to worry about a thing." And Mum, who was already frightened and confused by what was happening to her mind, said yes. She gave Carolyn power of attorney. I was living in Edinburgh at the time. Daniel was in Canada. We both trusted Carolyn because Mum trusted her, and because she sent us cheerful little updates every few weeks telling us everything was fine, Mum was comfortable. The bills were paid. I flew down every couple of months and everything always looked fine. Carolyn was there, smiling, cutting Mum's toast into triangles. Mum passed away in the spring 2 years ago. It was hard, but we had time to prepare. What we weren't prepared for was what came after. When Daniel flew back and we sat down with the solicitor to go through the estate, the numbers didn't add up. Mum had owned her house outright and had a significant amount in savings, the result of decades of careful living. There should have been close to £300,000 to her name. What was left was barely $80,000. The solicitor looked uncomfortable. He said he'd noticed some irregularities and had held off on finalizing anything until we could all be present. I remember sitting in that chair, feeling like the floor had tilted underneath me. Daniel kept asking the solicitor to repeat himself. Carolyn, who was sitting across the table, said there must be some kind of mistake, that Mum had had a lot of expenses, care costs, home modifications. She said it calmly. She looked us both in the eye. I spent the next 6 weeks living inside bank statements and financial records. I barely slept. I hired a forensic accountant, a woman who specialized in exactly this kind of case, and what she found was meticulous and damning. Carolyn had set up 3 separate accounts in the months after gaining power of attorney. Regular transfers, just below reporting thresholds. Medical invoices paid to a company that turned out to be registered in Carolyn's own name. A care consultant who didn't exist. She hadn't been sloppy. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. The day I laid it all out in the solicitor's office, with the forensic accountant beside me and Daniel on video call from Toronto, Carolyn came in expecting to finalize the estate. She had no idea what was waiting for her. When the solicitor slid the report across the table, I watched her face cycle through confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like relief, like she'd been waiting a long time to be caught. She tried to say it was a misunderstanding. She said Mum had told her she could use the money. For expenses. For her trouble. We reported her to the police that afternoon. The case took 14 months. Carolyn hired a solicitor, argued that Mum had consented, that there were no clear records to the contrary. But the forensic trail was too detailed, the fake invoices too obvious, the shell company too easily connected to her name. She pleaded guilty to financial abuse and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years and ordered to repay the full amount, which, given that she'd burned through most of it, meant she had to sell her flat. Daniel and I used what was recovered to set up a small bursary at the hotel where Mum had worked for so many years. A fund to help young employees with education costs. The hotel director cried when we told her. I think Mum would have found that funny and then cried as well. I don't feel triumphant about it. Carolyn was my Mum's sister. That means something, even now. But I also know that if we'd stayed quiet, she'd have walked away with everything Mum had spent her whole life building, and that I couldn't live with. Justice, in this case, came slowly. But it came. And sometimes that's enough. If this story hit close to home, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me yours. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Karma Served Cold. New stories every week.